I am so sorry we're late. Traffic was awful. This is my daughter, Lily.
Oh, it's absolutely fine. Merry Christmas.
He cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how loud the restaurant felt. "I'm Daniel," he said, his voice softer than he intended. The words seemed small compared to the moment. He shifted Noah slightly in his arms, unsure what to do with both his son and his nerves. Clara stood, the chair whispering against the floor. Her expression held no irritation, only quiet curiosity. Candlelight reflected in her eyes as she studied him. For reasons she could not yet name, she did not look away. "I'm glad you came," she said gently. The simplicity of the sentence caught him off guard. He had prepared for disappointment, not welcome. Something inside his chest loosened. "I'm really sorry I'm late," he said again, as if the words might build a bridge between them. He felt the weight of every minute he had lost. His life seemed to spill out in the apology. Late was more than a time tonight. It was his story. Clara glanced at the sleeping child in his arms. Her gaze softened, curiosity shifting into understanding. "You didn't come alone," she said quietly. The observation was not judgment, only fact. "This is Noah," Daniel replied, lowering his voice instinctively. He brushed a stray curl from the boy's forehead. The tenderness of the gesture was automatic, unperformed. Fatherhood had reshaped every part of him. Clara smiled in a way that felt real, not practiced. "Hi, Noah," she whispered, though the child did not stir. Her voice held no awkwardness, only warmth. Daniel had not expected that. For a moment, neither of them knew where to sit or how to begin. The table seemed too small for the life Daniel carried with him. He shifted his weight, suddenly self-conscious. The restaurant's quiet hum filled the space. Clara gestured to the chair across from her. "Please," she said. "Make yourself comfortable." The words felt like permission he hadn't known he needed. Daniel sat carefully, angling Noah so the boy could rest against his chest. The chair felt sturdier than he expected, grounding him. He let out a slow breath. The world seemed to settle by a fraction. A waiter approached, pausing politely when he noticed the child. "Can I start you with something warm?" he asked. His tone carried no surprise, only hospitality. Daniel felt a small wave of gratitude. "Hot chocolate if you have it," Daniel said, thinking of Noah waking later. He glanced at Clara, unsure if that was too much. She nodded, approving without a word. The moment felt quietly cooperative. They sat in a soft silence as the waiter left. Outside, snow continued to fall in steady, patient lines. Inside, the candle flickered between them, steady and warm. Daniel became aware of how long it had been since he had sat across from someone without an agenda. Clara folded her hands on the table. "Rough night?" she asked, not as a complaint, but as an invitation. Her eyes held no sharp edges. Daniel felt himself relax into honesty. "My sitter canceled," he said simply. "Work ran late." "I didn't want to cancel on you." The truth came out without embellishment. He was too tired for anything else. She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "I almost canceled too," she admitted. "Blind dates aren't usually my thing." The confession surprised them both. It made the moment feel balanced. Daniel gave a small, uncertain smile. "I'm not very good at starting over." He did not mention grief, only the shadow of it. The words felt heavy enough as they were. He wondered if he had already said too much. Clara studied him, her gaze thoughtful rather than critical. "Neither am I," she said. The honesty in her voice was quiet but unmistakable. For the first time that evening, Daniel felt something like relief. Noah shifted in his arms, making a soft sound. Daniel automatically adjusted the boy's coat, tucking it closer. The motion was so familiar it required no thought. Clara watched with something like awe. "You're a good father," she said gently. The words landed unexpectedly, like a hand on his shoulder. Daniel swallowed. Compliments about his parenting always felt heavier than praise about anything else. He looked down at Noah. "I'm trying," he said. The truth was both simple and exhausting. Trying was what his life had become. The waiter returned with drinks, setting down a mug of hot chocolate and 2 cups of tea. Steam curled into the air, carrying warmth with it. The small ritual made the moment feel real. Daniel thanked him quietly. They lifted their cups almost in unison. The simple act felt like a beginning. Snow continued to blur the city outside, but inside time seemed to soften. Clara took a sip, then looked at him over the rim of her cup. "So," she said, "tell me about you." The question was gentle, open, without expectation. Daniel had almost forgotten what it felt like to be asked. He hesitated, unsure where to begin. "I work at a warehouse during the day," he said. "At night I drive." The words felt small, like an incomplete picture. He wondered if that was enough. She listened without interruption. No glances at her phone, no polite nods that signaled disinterest, just attention. Daniel found himself continuing. "And Noah is everything," he added. "His mom passed away 3 years ago." The words came out quietly, carefully. He did not look up as he said them. Clara did not flinch. She did not offer sympathy in a rush. She simply met his eyes, steady and present. "I'm so sorry," she said, softly and sincerely. Daniel nodded once. He had learned that grief did not need to be explained. It only needed to be acknowledged. Her response felt exactly right. They sat with the truth for a moment. The candle flickered, casting gentle shadows. Outside, a couple laughed as they passed the window, unaware of the quiet inside. Clara broke the silence with a small smile. "My life looks very different," she said. "I work too much. I forget to go home sometimes." The admission felt personal, not polished. Daniel sensed the story behind it. He looked at her more closely, noticing the tiredness beneath her calm. "That sounds lonely," he said, without intending to be bold. The words slipped out, honest and unguarded. He worried he had crossed a line. She considered his words, then nodded slowly. "It can be," she said. "Success doesn't always mean connection." The truth in her voice made his chest tighten. He recognized the feeling, though from a different life. Noah stirred again, this time opening his eyes. He blinked sleepily, confused by the warm light and unfamiliar faces. Daniel smiled down at him. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. Noah looked at Clara with the open curiosity only children possess. "Hi," he said softly. The single word carried no fear, only wonder. Daniel felt his heart soften. Clara leaned forward slightly. "Hi, Noah," she replied. "I'm Clara." Her voice was gentle, almost reverent. The moment felt delicate, like something that should not be rushed. Noah studied her for a long second. Then he nodded, solemn and serious. "You have nice eyes," he said. The honesty of a child filled the space. Daniel nearly laughed from surprise. Clara laughed first, warm and genuine. The sounds seemed to change the air between them. It was not the controlled laughter of meetings and presentations, but something unguarded. Daniel felt himself smile without effort. "You're very observant," she told Noah. The boy seemed satisfied with that answer. He leaned back against his father, already drifting again. Trust returned him to sleep. Daniel exhaled slowly, a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "I hope this isn't too much," he said, gesturing slightly to Noah. The old fear of being a burden crept back. He watched her face carefully. "It's not," Clara said immediately. "It's real." The word carried weight. She did not hesitate. For the first time in years, Daniel did not feel like he had to apologize for his life. The waiter returned with bread and soup, placing the bowls carefully. The warmth of the food filled the small space between them. It felt strangely domestic, as if this were not a first meeting but a continuation of something unspoken. They ate slowly, conversation unfolding in gentle pieces. Daniel spoke of morning routines, of learning to braid hair from online videos, of reading the same bedtime story every night because Noah insisted. Each detail felt like a small confession. Clara listened with something like wonder. "You built a life around him," she said quietly. Daniel nodded, unsure how else he could have survived. He had not realized how visible that devotion was. She shared pieces of her own world, careful but honest. Late nights in offices, decisions that affected thousands, the strange loneliness of always being needed but rarely known. Daniel recognized the exhaustion beneath her composed exterior. Outside, the storm deepened, snow thickening against the glass. Inside, the restaurant felt like a pocket of warmth in a cold city. Time passed without either of them noticing. The clock no longer mattered. At one point, Clara glanced toward the window. "You know," she said softly, "I almost left." The admission was gentle, not accusatory. Daniel's heart tightened. "I don't blame you," he replied. "I would have." The truth was simple. He had lived with disappointment long enough to expect it. She shook her head slightly. "I'm glad I didn't." The words were quiet but firm. Daniel met her eyes, something unspoken passing between them. The moment felt like the edge of something new. Noah shifted again, yawning as he woke for the second time. Daniel offered him the hot chocolate, helping him hold the mug. The boy's eyes lit up at the first sip. Joy bloomed in a small, ordinary way. Clara watched, her expression softening further. "He's wonderful," she said. Daniel felt pride and vulnerability in equal measure. Loving his son had always been easy. Sharing that love with someone else was new. "He's my world," Daniel said simply. He did not realize how much of himself was in that sentence. Clara seemed to understand anyway. The plates gradually emptied, the candle burning lower. Other diners began to leave, coats pulled on, laughter fading into the night. The restaurant grew quieter, as if giving them space. Daniel felt the evening slipping away. When the check arrived, Daniel reached for it automatically. Habit, pride, instinct, all in one motion. Clara placed her hand lightly over his. The contact was brief, but unmistakable. "Let me," she said softly. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. The gesture felt less like charity and more like partnership. Something about that mattered deeply to him. They stood together near the door, preparing to step back into the cold. Daniel adjusted Noah's coat again, careful as always. The simple ritual grounded him. He glanced at Clara, unsure how to end the night. Outside, snow fell in slow, deliberate patterns. City lights reflected in the white, turning the street into something almost magical. Breath rose in small clouds between them. The world felt quiet in a way it rarely did. "Thank you for waiting," Daniel said, the words carrying more than their surface meaning. He meant for the lateness, for the complications, for his life as it was. He wondered if she could hear all of that in his voice. She looked at him, eyes steady and kind. "I wasn't waiting," she said. "I was exactly where I needed to be." The certainty in her tone made his chest tighten. Noah stirred one last time, murmuring something only Daniel could understand. Daniel kissed his son's forehead, holding him closer. He looked back at Clara, unsure what came next. But for the first time in a long time, he was not afraid of the unknown. Snow continued to fall around them, silent and endless. The city moved on, unaware of the small miracle unfolding on a sidewalk. Daniel felt something he had almost forgotten how to recognize. It felt like hope, arriving quietly on a night he had almost missed. The restaurant door closed behind Daniel with a soft chime, sealing out the cold night. For a moment, the warmth inside felt almost unreal after the sharp bite of snow and wind. He paused just inside the entrance, Noah still asleep against his chest, trying to steady the small rush of emotion that had followed him in from the street. Clara watched him from the table near the window. She had been alone there for nearly 20 minutes before he arrived, long enough for doubt to begin its familiar whisper. Blind dates were a risk she rarely took, and when she did, they almost always ended the same way. Polite conversation, thin smiles, and the subtle shift in a man's posture once he realized who she was, the CEO, the woman with power. The one who didn't quite fit into anyone's imagined version of easy, but when Daniel walked in carrying his sleeping child, the script she had been expecting simply fell apart. There was no calculation in his eyes, no quick assessment of what she might represent in his world. Only exhaustion, apology, and something else she recognized immediately: love. Not the abstract kind, but the kind that shaped every movement of his body, the way he adjusted his grip on Noah, the way his voice softened when he spoke the boy's name. She had stood without thinking. Now, as he approached, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Curiosity that wasn't strategic, interest that wasn't filtered through caution. Just a quiet desire to know who he was beneath the snow and the apologies. They sat. The table felt smaller once he was there, as if it had been designed for two uncomplicated adults, not a man carrying a child and a life heavy with responsibility. Yet somehow the closeness did not feel awkward, it felt human. Clara wrapped her hands around her tea, letting the warmth seep into her palms. She noticed the way Daniel kept glancing down at Noah. checking on him even as they spoke, as if fatherhood had rewired his instincts entirely. It was not a performance, it was who he was. "So," she said softly, breaking the early silence, "how old is he?" "4," Daniel replied. His voice changed when he spoke about his son, gentler, steadier. "He turns 5 in March. He's convinced that means he'll be able to do everything on his own." Clara smiled. "That sounds about right." They shared a small laugh, and something in the air loosened. As the waiter brought their drinks, Clara studied Daniel more carefully. He was not what most people would have expected her to be sitting with. No tailored suit, no polished charm, no effortless confidence. His jacket showed signs of wear, his hands were rough in the way of someone who worked with them every day, and there was a faint shadow beneath his eyes that spoke of nights cut too short. Yet she found herself drawn to him in a way she had not felt in years. "Tell me about you," she said again when the waiter left. Daniel hesitated. The question seemed simple, but for him it wasn't. His life had been reduced to necessities for so long that he rarely thought about how to describe himself as a person rather than a provider. "I'm figuring things out," he said finally. "I work at a warehouse during the day. Nights I drive. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills." Clara nodded, not because she was being polite, but because she understood the language of work that never quite left you room to breathe. Her world was different, but the exhaustion was the same. "And before that?" she asked gently. Daniel glanced down at Noah, his thumb brushing lightly over the edge of the boy's sleeve. "Before that, I had a different life. My wife and I had plans, ordinary ones, house, maybe another kid someday. Then one day she didn't come home." The words were quiet, but they landed heavily. Clara did not interrupt. She had learned long ago that some truths needed space to exist. She simply met his eyes, letting him know she was listening. "It was sudden," he continued, "no warning. One moment she was there, the next she wasn't, and I had this little person looking at me like I was his whole world." His voice wavered, just slightly. "I didn't have time to fall apart." Clara felt something in her chest tighten. She had seen loss in many forms, financial, professional, even personal, but there was something about the way he spoke of it that made it feel raw and immediate, as if it were still happening inside him. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Thank you." They sat with the truth for a moment, the candle between them flickering softly. Outside, snow continued to fall, the world muffled and distant. Clara took a breath. "My life looks very different," she said, "but in some ways—" "It isn't," he looked at her, curious. "I run a company," she said. "It's large, demanding. Most days it feels like it owns more of me than I do. People see the success, the numbers, the headlines. They don't see the empty apartment at the end of the night." Daniel listened, not with awe, but with recognition. Loneliness wore many disguises. "That sounds exhausting," he said. "It is," she admitted. "I've built something I'm proud of. But sometimes I wonder what I traded for it." Her gaze dropped briefly to Noah, "watching you with him. It's like looking at a world I never quite allowed myself to imagine." The honesty of her words surprised them both. Noah stirred, his small face creasing in a sleepy frown. Daniel adjusted him automatically, murmuring something too soft to hear. Clara watched the gesture, feeling something unfamiliar stir inside her, something tender, almost aching. "You're a good father," she said again, more firmly this time. Daniel swallowed. Compliments in that area always cut deeper than he expected. "I just do what I can," he said. "Some days I feel like I'm failing him in 100 small ways." Clara shook her head slightly. "From where I'm sitting, it doesn't look like failure." Their soup arrived, steaming and fragrant. The warmth felt comforting, almost domestic, and Clara realized how rare it was for her to sit in a place that didn't feel like a negotiation or a performance. With Daniel, there was no need to impress. He wasn't trying to be anything other than what he was. They ate slowly, conversation unfolding naturally. Daniel spoke about the small rituals that defined his life. Noah insisting on the same bedtime story every night. The struggle of getting him dressed on winter mornings, the way he saved every drawing his son brought home. He laughed softly as he recounted the chaos of single parenthood, but beneath the humor was a deep, unwavering devotion. Clara found herself absorbing every word. She told him about boardrooms and decisions that carried the weight of thousands of jobs, about the strange pressure of always being the one in charge, even when she felt as lost as anyone else. She admitted that she sometimes stayed at the office simply because going home meant facing how quiet her life had become. "I don't think I ever learned how to stop," she said. "How to just be." Daniel considered that. "Maybe you just never had a reason to," he said. The simplicity of the statement struck her. She had built her life around ambition, around proving something, though she was no longer sure what. Sitting across from a man who had rebuilt his life around love, rather than achievement, made her question things she had never allowed herself to examine. Noah woke fully a little while later, blinking in confusion at the warm light and unfamiliar faces. Daniel offered him the hot chocolate, guiding his hands carefully around the mug. Clara watched the exchange, her heart unexpectedly full. "Hi," Noah said to her, his voice still thick with sleep. "Hi," she replied, smiling. "Did you have a good nap?" He nodded solemnly, then studied her for a long moment. "You have nice eyes," he said again, as if reaffirming a truth he had already decided upon. Clara laughed, the sound surprising even herself. "Thank you," she said. "You're very kind." Noah seemed satisfied and returned his attention to the hot chocolate, content in his small world. Something in Clara's chest shifted. It wasn't a dramatic realization, not fireworks or sweeping certainty. It was quieter than that, a recognition that this moment, simple and imperfect, felt more real than most of her carefully constructed life. They talked until the restaurant began to empty, the evening stretching on without either of them noticing. For once, Clara did not glance at her phone, did not calculate the value of her time and productivity. She was simply present. When the check arrived, Daniel reached for it out of instinct, but she stopped him gently. "Let me," she said. He hesitated, then nodded. "Next time," he said softly. It wasn't a question. It was a hope. She met his eyes. "I'd like that." They bundled up and stepped back into the cold night together, the city glowing with Christmas lights. Snow fell steadily, softening the edges of everything. Daniel adjusted Noah's coat one last time, the familiar gesture grounding him. Clara watched, knowing that something in her life had quietly shifted. "Thank you for waiting," he said again. "I wasn't waiting," she replied. "I was exactly where I needed to be." They stood there for a moment, snow drifting between them. Two lives that could not have been more different, yet somehow, in that fragile winter night, they felt strangely aligned. Neither of them knew what would come next. But for the first time in a long time, both felt something they had almost forgotten how to recognize. Hope. The days after Christmas Eve passed more quietly than either of them had expected. For Daniel, life returned to its familiar rhythm: early mornings, hurried breakfasts, long hours at the warehouse, late night driving when the bills pressed too tightly. Yet something inside him had shifted. The world no longer felt quite as heavy, not because his responsibilities had lessened, but because he was no longer carrying them alone in his heart. He found himself thinking about Clara at unexpected moments. While stacking boxes in the warehouse, he would remember the way her eyes softened when she looked at Noah. While sitting in his car between ride requests, he would recall her quiet laughter and the calm in her voice when she spoke about her life. It wasn't a fantasy of romance that filled his thoughts, it was something gentler, more real. The feeling that, for the first time in years, someone had seen his life not as baggage, but as truth. He had not known what to expect when he texted her 2 days after their dinner. "Just wanted to say thank you again. I hope you had a good Christmas." He stared at the screen longer than he would ever admit, half expecting the message to disappear into silence. When the reply came, it was simple. "I did. I was thinking about you and Noah. I'd like to see you again. If you'd like that too." Daniel read the words 3 times before letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For Clara, those days were filled with meetings, deadlines, and the familiar weight of responsibility. But even as she sat in glass-walled conference rooms and signed documents that shaped the future of her company, her thoughts kept drifting back to that small table by the window, to a tired man holding his son with a tenderness that felt almost sacred. She had built her life on control of her time, her emotions, her trajectory. Love, she had decided long ago, was a distraction she could not afford. And yet, one quiet evening with Daniel had undone that certainty more than years of reflection ever had. When she agreed to see him again, it felt both terrifying and inevitable. Their second meeting was not grand. There was no expensive restaurant, no carefully curated atmosphere. Daniel suggested a small park near his apartment, the kind of place where children played on worn swings and parents sat on cold benches with coffee cups in hand. It was simple, honest, completely him. Clara arrived early, bundled in a coat that had seen more boardrooms than playgrounds. She stood near the entrance, watching families move through the space with an unfamiliar ache in her chest. This world of ordinary moments, of small joys, had always felt just beyond her reach. She saw Daniel before he saw her. He walked slowly, one hand holding Noah's, the other carrying a small bag of snacks. Noah was talking animatedly, pointing at something only he could see. Daniel listened with full attention, nodding as if every word mattered. The sight made something in Clara's chest tighten. When Daniel finally noticed her, his face lit with a warmth that caught her off guard. "Hey," he said, a smile breaking through the weariness she remembered. "Hey," she replied. Noah tugged gently on his father's hand. "Daddy, is this Clara?" Daniel nodded. "It is." Noah studied her, then grinned. "You came back?" The simple statement held more meaning than the child could know. "I did," Clara said softly. They walked together through the park, conversation unfolding easily. Noah ran ahead, stopping every few steps to show them a leaf, a rock, a bird perched on a fence. Clara found herself laughing more than she had in months. There was no pressure here, no need to be impressive, just presence. They sat on a bench as Noah played nearby. "This is nice," Clara said quietly. Daniel glanced at her, a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "I know it's not exactly what you're used to," she shook her head. "That's not what I meant. It feels real, like life." He considered that, then nodded. "Yeah, it is." They talked while watching Noah about work, about exhaustion, about the small victories that kept them going. Daniel spoke about his fears, the constant worry that he wasn't doing enough, that one mistake could cost his son everything. Clara listened, not as someone offering solutions, but as someone willing to sit with his uncertainty. "You don't have to be perfect," she said gently. "You just have to be there." Daniel looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "Some days that feels like the hardest part." She understood more than he knew. As weeks passed, their connection deepened in quiet, unassuming ways. There were more walks, shared meals at small diners, evenings spent on Daniel's couch while Noah slept in the next room. They did not rush. There was no dramatic declaration, no sweeping romance. What they built was steadier than that, something rooted in understanding and patience. Yet beneath the calm, both of them carried fears they did not immediately voice. For Daniel, the fear was simple and sharp, losing this. He had lost once in a way that had shattered him. The idea of opening his heart again felt like standing on the edge of something fragile. Clara was different from anyone he had ever known, her world so far removed from his own. Part of him worried that eventually she would realize how incompatible their lives truly were. He was a man scraping together stability for his son. She was a woman who commanded rooms and shaped industries. What could possibly bridge that gap? For Clara, the fear was quieter but just as heavy. She had built her identity on independence. She did not know how to make space for another person in a life already crowded with responsibility. Loving Daniel meant stepping into a world that was not built around her. It meant accepting a role she had never imagined for herself, one that involved bedtime stories, school schedules, and a child who would, inevitably, come first. She did not fear loving him. She feared not knowing how to belong in his life without disrupting it. The unspoken tension finally surfaced one evening in Daniel's small apartment. Noah had fallen asleep after insisting that Clara read him a story, a small victory that left her both touched and unsettled. Now the two of them sat in the quiet living room, the soft hum of the heater the only sound. Clara turned the mug in her hands, gathering her thoughts. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" He looked up from where he was absent-mindedly straightening a stack of papers on the table. "Of course," she hesitated. "Do you ever worry that I don't fit into your life?" The question hung between them. Daniel set the papers down. "What do you mean?" She took a breath. Your world is very real. It's about survival, about being there for Noah, about routines and responsibilities that don't bend. My world is different. I don't want to be something that complicates things for you. He studied her, seeing the vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. I worry about that, he admitted. Not because I don't want you here, but because I don't know how to protect what we're building. She met his gaze. I don't want to be someone who makes your life harder. You don't, he said quickly. You make it lighter. He paused, searching for the right words. But I'm scared. I've lost before, and Noah. He doesn't get a second chance at stability. The honesty in his voice cut deep. Clara nodded slowly. I know, and that's what scares me too. I've never been responsible for anyone but myself. I don't want to step into your life and fail. Daniel reached for her hand, the gesture tentative but sincere. We don't have to have everything figured out, he said. We just have to be honest with each other. She squeezed his hand gently. I want to try. I just need to know that I'm not intruding on something sacred. You're not intruding, he said. You're becoming part of it. The words felt fragile and powerful all at once. Their relationship did not transform overnight. There were still moments of doubt, of hesitation, of carefully navigating each other's worlds. Clara struggled with the limitations of Daniel's schedule, with plans that had to bend around Noah's needs. Daniel struggled with the insecurity that flared when he stepped into Clara's world events where he felt out of place, conversations that reminded him of the gap between their lives. But every time those doubts surfaced, they returned to the same place: honesty. One afternoon, Daniel brought Noah to Clara's office for the first time. She had been nervous about it, unsure how a child would fit into a space defined by glass walls and quiet intensity. But when Noah walked in, wide-eyed and curious, something remarkable happened. The rigid atmosphere softened, people smiled. Conversations paused. The sterile environment felt, for the first time, human. Clara watched Daniel kneel to Noah's level, explaining where they were and why they had to use their inside voices. The pride in his eyes was unmistakable. In that moment, Clara realized something that both frightened and grounded her. This was no longer just about Daniel. This was about a family in the making. The realization did not arrive with fanfare. It arrived quietly, like snow settling on the city, transforming everything without demanding attention. Later that evening, as they walked back to the car, Noah holding Clara's hand for the first time without hesitation, she felt the weight of what she was stepping into. She also felt, for the first time, that it might be exactly where she was meant to be. Yet life, as it always did, tested them. A few weeks later, Clara received an offer that could redefine her career and international expansion, that would require long-term travel, extended time away, and a level of commitment that would leave little room for anything else. She did not tell Daniel immediately. Not because she wanted to hide it, but because she was afraid of what it would mean. When she finally did, the conversation was difficult in a way neither of them had experienced yet. This is big, Daniel said quietly after she explained. His voice held no accusation, only reality. It's everything you've worked for. It is, she said, but it would mean being away. A lot, he nodded slowly. And Noah, I know, she whispered. That's why I'm telling you now. I don't want to make a decision that doesn't consider. U.S., the word hung in the air, heavy and fragile. Daniel looked down, gathering his thoughts. I would never ask you to give up your life for me, he said finally. Or for us, she felt a sting in her eyes. But what if I want to choose a different version of it? He looked up, surprised. I've spent my entire life chasing one thing, she continued. Success, control, certainty, and now I found something I didn't know I was missing. Her voice wavered. I don't know how to weigh those things against each other. Daniel reached for her, resting his forehead lightly against hers. Whatever you choose, we'll face it honestly. They did not resolve everything that night. There were tears, long silences, moments of doubt. But there was also a shared understanding that what they were building was worth protecting, even if the path forward was uncertain. Part 3 of their story was not about perfect harmony. It was about choosing to stay, to listen, to adapt. It was about two people from different worlds learning that love was not something that replaced their lives, but something that reshaped them. And in the quiet moments when Noah laughed between them or fell asleep on the couch while they talked in hushed voices, both Daniel and Clara felt it clearly. This was no longer just a chance encounter on Christmas Eve, it was a beginning. The decision did not arrive all at once. For Clara, it came in fragments, moments scattered through ordinary days. It came while she sat in a glass-walled conference room listening to voices debate numbers that no longer stirred her. It came while she stood in her apartment at night, staring out at a city that glittered endlessly but felt strangely hollow. It came when her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel, something simple like, "Noah lost another tooth today," and she smiled in a way no professional victory had ever given her. The offer lay on her desk untouched. It was everything she had once wanted: global expansion, prestige, a chance to leave her mark in a way few ever could. The kind of opportunity that defined careers, the kind people dreamed of, and yet, it no longer felt like the only life worth choosing. She had built her world on certainty, on control, on the belief that success was something you climbed toward alone. But now, there was another kind of life calling to her. One that didn't glitter, one that didn't make headlines. One that lived in small kitchens, school hallways, and quiet evenings after long days. A life with Daniel. A life with Noah. When she finally asked Daniel to meet her, her voice was calm but her heart was not. They returned to the park where so much of their connection had begun. Winter was fading now, the sharp edges of the cold softened by hesitant sunlight. Snow lingered only in patches, clinging to the ground as if reluctant to let go. Noah ran ahead of them, chasing his own laughter. Clara watched him, her chest tightening with something both beautiful and terrifying. Daniel noticed. "You okay?" She nodded. "I just need to tell you something." They sat on their familiar bench. "I had turned down the offer," she said. Daniel stared at her, not in relief, not in gratitude, but in something closer to alarm. "Clara," he said quietly, "you didn't have to do that." "I know," she replied. "That's why I did." He shook his head, struggling for words. "That was your future, your career. Everything you've worked for." She met his eyes. "It was everything I worked for. But it's not everything I want anymore." The wind moved gently through the trees. Noah's laughter echoed in the distance. "I spent my life chasing one definition of success," she continued. "And I was good at it, but then you and Noah happened. And suddenly, the world felt different, fuller, more honest. I don't want to live in a way that leaves no room for what actually matters." Daniel swallowed, emotion tightening his throat. "I never wanted you to choose between me and your dreams. I didn't choose against my dreams," she said softly. I realized they had changed. They sat in silence, the weight of the moment settling not as drama, but as truth. When Noah ran back toward them, breathless and grinning, Daniel pulled him close. For a long moment, Clara simply watched the two of them, the simple intimacy of father and son, and felt the quiet certainty she had been searching for. From that day forward, life did not magically become easier, but it became clearer. Clara reshaped her work instead of letting it consume her. She remained CEO, but she drew boundaries where she once had none. She said no when she had once said yes automatically. She built space into her life, space for dinners that weren't rushed, for weekends that weren't scheduled down to the minute, for a world that existed beyond conference rooms. Daniel continued working hard. Bills did not disappear, exhaustion did not vanish. But the loneliness that had once wrapped around him so tightly began to loosen its grip. There was someone who noticed when he was quiet, someone who asked how his day had really been, someone who stayed. For Noah, the change was subtle but profound. He did not call Clara Mom, no one ever suggested he should, but he began to expect her, to look for her, to ask when she was coming over next. One evening, as Clara helped him with a puzzle on the living room floor, he said casually, "You're part of our house now." She froze. "What do you mean?" she asked gently. He shrugged as if the answer were obvious. "You're always here. You help me with stuff. You make Daddy smile." He pushed a puzzle piece into place. "That means you belong." The words hit her harder than any professional accolade ever had. Later that night, after Noah had gone to bed, Clara stood in the doorway of Daniel's small apartment. The space was modest, worn in places, filled with the quiet evidence of a life built on care rather than luxury. "I don't know what I'm supposed to be in his life," she said. "But I know I don't want to disappear from it." Daniel stepped closer. "You already haven't." Their relationship deepened not through grand declarations, but through the ordinary. Grocery shopping on weekends. Cooking meals that were sometimes terrible and sometimes perfect. Folding laundry together while talking about nothing and everything. Sitting on the couch after long days, exhausted but content. There were moments of fear. Daniel sometimes lay awake at night, wondering if he was enough for someone like her. If one day she would look at his life, its limits, its responsibilities, and realize she had chosen something too small. Clara sometimes wondered if she was ready for the weight of loving not just a man, but a child whose heart had already known loss. They did not hide those fears from each other. One night, while sitting on the balcony, the city stretching below them, Daniel finally spoke what had been haunting him. "I'm scared I'll fail you," he said, "that I'll fail him. That one day you'll wake up and realize you deserve more than what I can give." Clara turned to him. "I don't measure my life by what I deserve anymore. I measure it by what I choose." She took his hands. "And I choose this, I choose you. I choose him." He looked at her, eyes shining with something dangerously close to hope. "What if I lose you?" he whispered. "Then we'll have loved honestly," she said. "But I'm not planning on leaving." That night Daniel slept more peacefully than he had in years. The true test of what they were building did not come through conflict, but through fear. One winter night, Noah woke with a fever so high that Daniel's hands shook as he checked the thermometer. Panic rose fast and fierce, the memory of loss pressing hard against his chest. Clara was there within minutes. They took turns through the night, cooling Noah's forehead, whispering reassurance, sitting in the dim light of his bedroom while the world outside slept. Clara had never been so afraid for another human being in her life. At one point, as Noah finally drifted into calmer sleep, Clara looked at Daniel and understood something with absolute clarity. This was love. Not romance, not passion, but the choice to stay awake in fear, to carry someone else's vulnerability as your own. Noah recovered, as children often do, but the night changed them. It marked the moment when Clara knew she was no longer standing beside their lives. She was inside them. Spring arrived slowly. Life settled into a rhythm that was not perfect but real. Clara learned how to navigate school schedules and work calls. Daniel learned how to let someone else share the weight he had carried alone for so long. One afternoon in the park, Noah suddenly stopped in front of a blooming tree. "Can you come to my school thing next week?" he asked Clara. "It's for families." Daniel froze, not wanting to influence the moment. Clara knelt in front of Noah. "I'd really like to," she said. Noah smiled, simple and certain. "Okay." At the school event, Clara sat in a folding chair while children sang off-key on a small stage. It was not glamorous. It was not impressive. It was everything. When Noah scanned the room and saw her, his face lit up. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. She had led companies, shaped markets, stood on stages before thousands. Nothing had ever felt like this. Afterward, as Noah ran ahead to show a friend his project, Daniel took her hand. "I used to think my life was over when I lost her," he said quietly. "That everything meaningful had already happened." She squeezed his hand. "And now?" "And now I think maybe some of the best parts were just waiting." The future did not unfold smoothly. There were arguments over time and money. There were moments when exhaustion turned small misunderstandings into heavy ones. There were days when Clara questioned whether she could ever fully belong in a life that had already been built without her. But there was also laughter at the kitchen table. Movie nights with Noah asleep between them. Quiet moments when Daniel would look at her and say, "I don't know what I did to deserve you," and she would answer, "You chose me." Nearly a year after the night they met, Daniel asked Clara to return with him to the restaurant where everything had begun. The same table by the window waited for them, candle unlit. The city outside looked almost unchanged, but they were not. "I don't have much to offer in the way of grand gestures," Daniel said as they sat. "But I have a life, a son, and a heart I never thought I'd be brave enough to open again." He reached into his jacket pocket, hands trembling. "I don't know what the future looks like," he said. I only know I don't want to face it without you. He knelt beside the table. Clara, will you build this life with me? Tears filled her eyes. Yes, she whispered. I will. There was no applause, no spectacle. Just two people choosing each other in a quiet room. Later, walking through the city under soft rain, Clara leaned against his shoulder. Do you ever think about that night? She asked. The one where you were late? All the time, he said. If I had left, he stopped and turned to her. Then we wouldn't be here, she smiled through tears. Maybe the universe delayed you on purpose, he laughed softly. Or maybe it just gave us time to become who we needed to be. They returned to his apartment, where life waited in the form of toys on the floor and drawings taped to the wall. This is home, Clara said. And for the first time in her life, the word meant people, not walls. On the next Christmas Eve, snow fell again over the city. Noah sat between them on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching a movie he already knew by heart. Daniel looked at Clara, her face glowing softly in the light of the screen. A year ago, he had been late to a dinner, late to a life he didn't yet know was waiting. Now he was exactly where he was meant to be. And in the quiet of that winter night, surrounded by love he once believed was lost forever, Daniel understood something simple and true. Some miracles don't arrive on time. They arrive when you are finally ready to believe in them.